like to thank you again for taking the time, mate. Is there any questions that you want to take off the table before we get into it?
No, I'm happy to talk to anything you might put to me. If I have issue with anything, I'll let you know at that time, but I'm very keen to talk as often as I can on this topic.
You've been around this for a very long time, so therefore the information and your insight as to just how bad things are getting and have gotten, I think a lot of people, when they see this, are going to start to comprehend what we already know through lived experience, and that is that the best interest of our children is not being implied. It's not being paramount decisions in things that are being passed down. So again, mate, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Daniel.
All right, so today on Unspoken Truth, we've got Michael Jose. He's taken the time out of his busy schedule to try and educate and share with us some of the insights around the family court jurisdiction and, in my opinion, the destruction that it causes. So again, Michael, thank you and appreciate your time, mate. So let's jump straight into it. The first question that I've got for you, sir, is from your professional perspective, how deeply entrenched is gender bias in the Australian family law system today?
Okay, so in principle, in Australia and all Western countries, we have the concept that you can't discriminate on the basis of gender and other attributes. That is in legislation. But despite that, and also human rights protection, gender bias is profound within the family court and the associated DV systems. We hear that manifest in many different ways. I mean, the very fact that they use terminology such as the gendered nature of family violence or gendered family violence or gendered domestic violence is a beginning of that process. But also, if you dig deeper, if you look at the background of the legislation, typically legislation, once again, has to be drafted so that it's gender neutral. But you look at the explanatory notes, you look at the preamble, and you'll find gendered comments. So, for instance, in some of the key state legislation, in the preamble at the top of the legislation, it'll say things such as women are the majority of victims of domestic violence, which flies in the face of significant international and national research. And then it filters down to the fact that in policy is heavily gendered. You hear that manifest in many different ways. Funding sources are gendered. The actions of the government departments and the jurisdictions of the family court and the criminal court act in a way that applies a gendered mantra and philosophy. The judgments are applied in a gendered manner, and everybody within the industry often brings their own particular gender bias. So it's deeply entrenched. It's fundamental to the entire industry.
It really is. No, and well said, mate. I couldn't have articulated anywhere near that, but from a layperson's point of view, it is basically the presumption of innocence for a man being overruled and ignored, isn't it?
Yeah, so the fundamental principles of justice are under attack in Australia, and I'll probably take the opportunity to talk to that more.
Yep, no, beautiful. All right, mate, next question is, why do the courts still seem to favour maternal custody despite legislation that supposedly promotes shared parenting?
So let's talk about the concept of shared parental responsibility. So that was addressed in the 2019 Senate inquiry into family law. So the concept of shared parental responsibility was written into our Family Law Act decades ago, and it is an important concept. Firstly, it's not shared parental custody and it's not shared parenting, but it still is in concept the idea that mum and dad start in the same position in relation to the kids at the point of separation. So when it comes to key decisions around the kids, they've both got the same rights to parent those kids. Access to those kids and shared parenting or parenting orders flow from that. Now, firstly, it is unfortunately has always been a rebuttable presumption. So it has been the first thing that's been under attack in the family court, and it's one of the many systems that was in place that underpins motivations for mothers to make false accusations of domestic violence, to take that shared parental responsibility presumption under attack. Now, in 2023, completely unprecedented, Labor wrote that out of the Family Law Act. Now, there was no basis to do that, but they basically took away mum and dad starting at the same position, and the primary caregiver, which is in so many cases the mother, now starting here, and dad having to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands just to get to that first starting line in relation to having a presumption that he has equal right to parent those children. Now, to give you an idea of how profound an impact that is, in my career, I've spoken with international advocates, lawyers, and researchers, particularly from the US and Canada, and they've been working for years to establish the shared parental responsibility in their legislation. So I was happy to talk to them about how important it was that we had that in Australia. I was happy to talk to them about the shortcomings of it, which is the fact that it's rebuttable. But nevertheless, they looked to Australia as the leading light in relation to how they could fix their legislation and make it better. We somehow got rid of that in 2023. Quite incredible. And for various and other reasons, we rolled on into 2024 with the highest ever fatal levels of domestic violence. I do see a link between those two things.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't have said it any better, mate. You did, right? It's obvious to those that know and those that have experienced that, you know, the direct link of male suicides is, without a question of a doubt, family court rulings. So, all right, next one, mate. Have you witnessed judicial officers making parenting decisions based on gendered stereotypes rather than evidence or actual child welfare principles? And if so, would you be able to share an example?
Let me just start by saying that what I talk about today is not my personal opinion from my personal experiences. It's my professional opinion.
Okay.
So just to give some credibility to that, I've been in law and justice for 25 years. I have a law degree, which was completed on academic scholarship with an academic award. I've also got 2 relevant degrees. I have a master's in IT and a degree in earth sciences. I was lucky enough to go on to work for a first-tier law firm when I graduated after law school, and I've worked for 2 other first-tier law firms. I've also worked for state and federal justice agencies. I've worked with victims of crime for 12 years. I've been involved in the family court in various ways for 11 years. I was a principal of a family law firm in my jurisdiction also. So the opinion I'm giving is my professional opinion. So it is my professional opinion that after 11 years in the jurisdiction operates to serve the interests of the mother only. So even in history, there was this concept of the best interests of the child that is now conflated with simply the best interests of the mother as the mother expresses it. The asymmetry in the family court and the associated criminal jurisdictions is profound. A recent case comes to mind. So we had a father who was a professional, successful, no criminal history. His relationship was breaking down. His partner had serious mental health issues. In part of the breaking down of the relationship, she assaulted him with a piece of wood and gave him a brain injury. She hit him over the head with a piece of wood and he ended up in an induced coma for 5 days. So we're talking about a serious domestic criminal assault. She was initially charged with that when he was in hospital, but in order to respond to that, she made 4 allegations of him having assaulted her, historical allegations. So when he came out of hospital, on the very next day when he was at home, he was charged with those 4 historical allegations of serious assault. Now, as a result of that process, he spent horrifying time in incarceration while waiting to be granted bail. He was assaulted within the system. It's befuddling to me what he went through and how he managed to prevail. Eventually, 3 of those charges were thrown out and the 4th didn't succeed. So they were all nonsense and they weren't valid. She was never recharged with domestic violence or recharged with that serious domestic violence assault that she submitted him to that resulted in grievous bodily harm. Since that time, she's weaponized the entire system. She's seized the house and he can't get her out. When she's been ordered to return his possessions, she's destroyed them, wiped his computers, wiped his hard drives. When she was directed to return his Range Rover, she emptied the coolants and let the engine run until it overheated, basically destroying it. He can't access his possessions even with court orders. She refuses to comply. She's taken out a fake AVO against him. She sets up opportunities to breach him by basically approaching him and causing him to interact and therefore get charged with further breaches. In addition to all of this, she goes regularly around to where he's living, which she's not meant to do, making declarations of love and asking him to get back with her. As I said, she has a significant history of serious mental health. And she's gone on to work for a domestic violence charity championing other women and their rights as victims of domestic violence. So she's a serious domestic violence offender, and here she is working to help other women. And he is a victim in this matter. So all of this would not have occurred if there was no assumption based upon gender from the get-go about who is right and who is wrong. If you reverse these scenarios, if he had hit her over the head and she had suffered an injury, he would have gone to jail for many years in relation to that and lost everything in the background too. So these scenarios cannot occur and don't occur without the ridiculous assumption about the genders and who is at fault and who is the victim.
Wow, you know, mate, I appreciate you sharing. I mean, I hear quite a lot of horror stories. I speak to a lot of dads on a day-to-day basis, and it never ceases to amaze me that they tell us that the law is fair and just, but then from a male's point of view, you hear things like this, and as you pointed out, you transpose the genders. This man's not seen the light of day for a very long time. So
That's
yeah,
exactly
no,
right.
thanks.
I mean, we just had
Appreciate you
that.
sharing, Mark. Sorry.
You're right, Daniel. We had
Mate,
that
move
woman
on.
recently who set fire to her long-term friend, but because she was offended by a statement that he made, and she was out on bail. So once again, can you imagine a guy setting fire to a friend of theirs, a female friend of theirs, being out on bail awaiting charges in relation to that?
Yeah.
It's inconceivable.
No, and I think there's no other way to put it, mate. We've got a double standard legal system that holds females to no accountability and coerces men. So that's my opinion on the fact anyway. So, all right, we'll move on, mate. How often do you encounter false, in your professional experience, how often do you encounter false or exaggerated allegations, such as domestic violence, via predominantly around custody disputes?
I think the vast majority of matters that go to the family court. So these are two individuals that can't settle, they can't become reasonable and can't mediate and settle it. The majority of matters that go to the family court, which are acrimonious, they are tainted heavily with false allegations. And that's everything from exaggeration right out to completely criminal allegations that are completely, absolutely false. The system is a farce because of it. Just looking at the principles of the concept of deceit, I mean, you and I, it would seem absurd to us to presume that there's a large cadre of society that wouldn't lie in certain circumstances. If you look at the research, so there's significant research that's been done over decades in laboratory environments using people that have contributed to these studies. And there's three key principles of the concept of deceit or lying. So people will lie, firstly, if they think they can get away with it, which is ironically the exact same principles of justice and corrections, that is criminal corrections. The key determinant or the key deterrent in relation to not doing crimes is if you think you're going to get caught. So it is related. So people will do things that they shouldn't be doing if they think they can get away with it. That's principle number one. So we know within the family court and within the criminal justice system, women are lying and they know that nothing happens. So that's their first motivation. The second motivation is if there's a reward. So in the context of the family court, the reward is primary custody of the kids, probably the house, huge amount of the wealth, huge amount of income and wealth moving forwards, and you get to make your ex, who you no longer like anymore, you get to hurt them terribly. So there are greater rewards than I think in any other context in society in relation to whether someone would be deceitful or lie. The third factor is if the lying is socialized. So if you're seeing people around you that are lying and getting away with it, or there are people encouraging you to lie, or if it's just a matter of course. And so we have an industry where making false allegations is common. It's expected. We have years of research showing that lawyers say and do the wrong thing to their clients and basically encourage them to, at the very least, exaggerate or make claims. So you've got the trifecta there. So you've got, if they can get away with it, if there are rewards, and the rewards are massive, if everyone around them is doing it and encouraging them to do it. So that results in pretty much 90% of people in those circumstances will be deceitful to a certain extent. And within the context of the family court, the criminal justice system, with those incentives, you're looking at angelic levels of ethics for anyone to actually say, no, I'm going to do the right thing, despite the fact I can get away with it, get rewarded, and everyone else is doing it. So as a result, the frequency of lying, it makes the jurisdiction a mockery. It's not justice because it can't make correct findings of facts because it doesn't know what is being presented in front of it is fact or not. And even when it finds out that those allegations or claims or facts are incorrect, it doesn't have or doesn't apply any consequences. It just moves on and pretends they never happened. So as a result, in my opinion, the family court's not acting as a justice sector. It's not acting as a court. It's pretty much acting as a government department that's administering bad policy under the guise of legality.
Yeah, no, well said. And the other, just touching on that third point, is that on the opposite side of the coin, if these women were mandatory sentences for making false allegations or actually held to account, the ripple effect would be that other mothers would hear about it and go, oh, well, you know, she made false allegations, but it backfired. She ended up doing 6 months in jail and the children went to live with the father. That there would be enough of a deterrent, I believe, to stop these false allegations from being used on a regular basis.
Absolutely. There needs to be consequences for false allegations. It's a basic principle of justice. And one of the things I have is that the family court is not operating as a justice sector. It can't be compared to the criminal court where there are significant ramifications. So in my 25 years in law, and a lot of that was in corporate law, if a witness is found to be lying, the very least of the consequences of that would be that they'd lose all integrity as a witness. So basically, they become useless as a witness. Other consequences are their case would be basically shot to pieces, and they would probably not succeed if they had an action in their own name in that jurisdiction once their integrity was gone. That even applies for criminal matters. If witnesses' integrity is undermined within the courtroom or by evidence, then basically they're going to get a worse outcome, or they're going to be useless as a witness in that matter. In the most appropriate cases, of course, there should be a charge of perjury. I mean, that is, once again, a basic principle of justice. If you're going to lie in sworn statements, lie under oath in the witness box, you should suffer actual ramifications. Now, commonly the defence is, or what is stated, well, if women suffer consequences for lying, then they're not going to come forwards. Now, that is a furphy. That is simply not true, because there's an enormous difference between a woman coming forwards with a claim that is either mistaken, which is not criminal, or that allegation cannot be proven. So therefore, it's not taken as being a fact. That is a very different thing than them making a statement of fact and significant evidence unambiguously demonstrating that they've manufactured that claim and they've lied under oath. So there's an entire spectrum there. So genuine women who genuinely have complaints, who come forwards in good faith without the intent to lie or deceive, even if the statements they're making are not found to be credible or not backed up, that is very different to evidence being found that demonstrates that they have been lying. And in the family court, I've seen for years just thousands, millions of pages of evidence outlining where women have lied and there being absolutely no consequences to their matter before the court. And indeed, I've seen judgment after judgment saying that the mother's credibility was undermined, or that these claims that she made were clearly not true, but nevertheless, the judgment still favours her.
And as you said, if the mother's credibility is questioned, they just move along and pretend like there's nothing here to see. Just let's move along. So,
which also flies in the face of research, Daniel, because research has shown that someone who's prepared to lie in such circumstances, so they're lying in some cases to benefit themselves, or they might argue to protect themselves, but in many cases they're lying to get a better outcome, a better financial outcome, or to hurt their ex. People who do that are not considered to be individuals that are probably fit to be the primary parent. So there should be significant ramifications for whether it's a mother or a father if they lie under oath in the court.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, Michael. Okay, in your view, what legal reforms are urgently needed to restore balance, fairness in how family law treats fathers, but also to reinstate the true core family values that we all grew up with, that worked so well for so long, when we both know and we can agree that a child needs a mum and a dad, provided both mum and dad are putting the child's best interest at the first point of their decisions, not using that to control and manipulate the other parent.
So the legal reforms that I endorse, and in fact were about 80 to 85% the words that I prepared when I was engaged by an external entity some 5 years ago, were captured in the Senate inquiry into family law's recommendations in their second report. So that Senate inquiry was convened in 2019. I think that report came out in 2020 or 2021. That goes into great detail. There's dozens of recommendations in relation to the Family Law Act and the DV industry. Labor governments implemented none of those. And in fact, they went completely contrary to those recommendations. But in summary, the principles are we need to equally address the violence against men and their children. So we need to get rid of the gendered narrative. That's a key underlying principle. So right across all literature, all content, we need to take out the false gendered narrative. And that's supported by, as I said, decades of research. We need to, post-separation, urgently reunite fathers with children. The process currently works to completely destroy and break down that relationship, and that leads to a significant amount of violence, including fatal violence. It's not unreasonable to expect that any parent will act out if they're separated from their beloved children. And in many cases, and the worst tragedies that I've been involved in over the last 11 years, there has been a tangible danger to the children represented by the mother, and fathers have been trying to tell the courts of that for months and into years. And in some cases, the courts did not act and tragedies occurred. And we're seeing recently, again, a spate of mothers harming children. We go back to 2022, and there was a record numbers of Australian mothers harming children. Unfortunately, most used fire. And statistics show in Australia and most Western countries that 70% of children harmed are harmed in the mother's household, and in the mother's household with a new stepfather. So children need their fathers. We should be urgently reuniting fathers with kids after separation. We should be addressing false allegations for the reasons that I outlined. The AVO system needs to be amended, and I'm happy to talk to that more. We need adequate evidentiary levels and standards in relation to AVOs. At the moment, it's purely subjective claims of fear. That is a ridiculously low threshold. That is too easy to achieve. And the impact of AVOs is utterly devastating, both in the lives of fathers and the lives of their relationship with their children, and also in the family court. We need to protect mental health treatment and the industry for fathers. For instance, we need to stop the family court subpoenaing mental health records of fathers, which actually impedes them getting the support they need at the most critical time. We need a minister for men. We've seen some inroads in relation to that recently from Labor in the appointment of an individual in a similar capacity, but we're all holding our breath to see what that actually means in reality. But we need people at the table that are absolutely championing the cause of men. I'm befuddled by the legislative changes that regularly occur, and to me, it is only explained by the fact that there's no one in the room saying, well, hang on, how is this going to affect half of the population? And hang on, I believe that this legislation will actually make matters worse, not better. So we need a minister for men. We need someone at the table when those policy decisions, those legislative decisions are being made. We need to resolve the issues with child support. Child support has a horrible correlation with increased suicide rates. It is incredibly impactful on our society. It encourages the breakdown of families by incentivising it. It encourages both parents to under-earn. It encourages the mothers to keep children away from fathers. We definitely need to reform the family court as per those recommendations of the Senate inquiry. And we need to perhaps really focus on non-gendered education for kids at an early age. Things such as how to identify healthy relationships, what are red flags in relationships, and how to separate safely, a key thing to allow kids to grow up and have healthy, respectful relationships, and that's both boys and girls. And then at the more incremental level, we need things such as a tiered definition of domestic violence. So if you do a Google search of domestic violence, it used to be the case it'd be a picture of a man assaulting a woman, but the definition in reality of domestic violence is now so ridiculously wide that it covers all bad behaviour that's not atypical in a relationship breakdown. So that's one of the many reasons why it's obvious that women are committing just as much domestic violence as men, because they're certainly able to be sadistic and harmful and hurtful within relationships. I use that case I referred to today as an example of that.
Yeah, no, and again, mate, well said. I mean, anybody that doesn't want to acknowledge that we've got a gender-driven system that somehow, and again, my opinion, but they've created these vile women that believe it's their right to be aggressive and violent because the lack of legal accountability, they believe they can get away with doing whatever it is they like. I mean, another case that was brought to my attention last week, Michael, was this woman in Western Australia stabbed the father of her child to death, allegedly, because he offered her $1,000 a week to please stop sleeping with other men because he was a fly-in, fly-out worker in the mines. Now, to my understanding, she's doing 4.5 years. Now, it bewilders me that we can genuinely sit back and say, you know what, that's a fair sentence for somebody that's brutally ended the life of another human being while she's carrying his seed. Like, has the world completely gone mad?
Yeah. So while we both know that the family court system is built on a philosophy of a gendered narrative, it is unfortunately a reality that the criminal justice system is under assault also. So I do believe the criminal justice system in Western countries retains a much higher level of integrity than the family court system. The family court system is acting rogue. And I think not only is its framework inadequate, unjust, unethical, immoral, but it's also operating illegally within its own framework on regular occasions because of its veil of secrecy and what the court is doing typically to self-represented litigants before it, where there's no one to hold the court to account for what it's doing and how it's behaving. And I can refer to examples of that without referring to cases. I've seen atrocious behaviour right up to the level of justices. But I still have faith in the criminal justice system because it's based upon fundamental principles of justice that go back hundreds of years. And in the West, we fought for those principles. But nevertheless, even the criminal justice system is applied in a gendered manner. You only have to look at all the research. So for equivalent crimes committed by a man or a woman, the outcomes and penalties and sentencing applied to the woman from the get-go, whether they're charged in the first place, whether they're given bail, the circumstances of that bail, how they're treated by the court, what defences they're allowed to use, and what sentence they might get. The outcome for the woman is significantly more favourable than identical circumstances for a male. But I must add, our criminal justice principles, which are, as I said, fundamental principles, and they're also embodied in human rights across the world, are repeatedly under assault. Every time you read in the media, there's been another change to law. And the most recent one, which I won't comment on, but it is an example of it, which is the fact that you can no longer use character witnesses supposedly for sexual assault cases. Each one of those changes in the legislation is an erosion of the fundamental principles of our criminal justice system, and typically in its application to men. So the main principles under attack, and you can see this in many different ways, is the presumption of innocence. So this believe all women principle is the beginning of that. The trial by media, trial by social media, the publishing of men's names when they've been charged in the absence of any conviction is all an example of the presumption of innocence going to the side. The right to a fair hearing, the public outcry and rage in relation to someone just purely being charged is an example of how that right to a fair hearing is falling by the wayside. And the need to prove matters beyond a reasonable doubt, particularly in the context of the believe all women mantra, is a breakdown of all those key principles too. So we're seeing our criminal justice system being broken down to a point where men are suffering significant consequences even before being convicted. So even while they're still innocent, even if acquitted, they suffer reputational and ongoing harm to their lives and careers. And we're getting closer and closer to a point where women can simply gravely harm the lives of men based upon false allegations for which they'll suffer no ramifications, even if those allegations are found to be untrue. And you can take that to an extreme. When women are committing violence against men and their children, they're getting less and less sentences. There are more and more defences. So the principle I apply, which is we're getting to a point where men can be destroyed purely on the allegations of women alone, and where women are getting closer to being able to get away with murder. But what we're having, or what we're seeing more and more, it's the concept of victim blaming. So we've all heard that. So if a guy's committed the crime, the circumstances around which that crime is committed, particularly if it's a crime of violence against women, or even, dare I say it, children, are not able to be examined openly in the media, or even to a degree within the court, because the accusation of victim blaming comes up. Now, that again is against the fundamental principles of justice. We need to know the circumstances of an allegation to determine whether there is a guilt, whether the elements of a criminal offence have applied, and importantly, whether there are any mitigating factors or defences in relation to whether he will be found guilty or what should be the appropriate sentencing. Flip that on its head. Oh, we certainly are allowed to victim blame if the victim is a man. So if a woman commits a crime against a man or his children, yes, you'll see all of the excuses that are either legally available or openly available in the public and the media to basically reduce her liability. And there was examples of this. The New South Wales coroner's report from years ago found that pretty much every woman that had killed their partners claimed domestic violence. And going back to the lying principle, so let's apply that. So if the reward is you'll get either out of jail for free or significantly lesser sentence, why would you not claim domestic violence? Your victim isn't there to defend himself. You can blame him all you like. everyone's going to claim it. So that's why in New South Wales, every single matter in a relationship where a woman killed their partner, they claim domestic violence. Flip it on its head, men aren't doing that. They're not able to do that.
No, and it's quite scary, mate, because the AVOs, I mean, I've had 3 of them myself over my journey, and they were all revoked and rebutted at the end of the day, withdrawn and revoked, sorry, the terminology was. But at the end of the day, the time frame they're left in place does the damage, and it doesn't matter, as you touched on before, you know, you might have not been charged and convicted, but at the end of the day, it still carries a weight and a burden throughout your life that at one point in time, and people can find all this information out about you now. You know, they readily just search you up, and all of a sudden you're a violent person without ever being a violent person.
Well, that is the key. I mean, when I talk with a man, a father who, let's just say the worst case scenario, they have a conviction for what appears to be a serious domestic violence offence. Now, from my professional opinion, that could mean this person has a serious problem with criminality, violence, behaviour, anger, and they need treatment, and they are a problem to society, and they need to reform their behaviour. But it could also mean that they're the victim, that they have done actually nothing wrong, that they were accused of something that didn't happen, that's been taken out of context, and that they were the victim within the history of the relationship, and their perpetrator is the person that's charged them and managed to get a conviction against them. So from my professional experience, I make no assumptions in relation to what I hear about someone until I read the facts, I read the background, and I get to know the person themselves. Because so flawed is our system, you cannot make an assumption based upon that. And I don't agree that anything in relation to these systems, family or criminal, should be available in any context unless it's a conviction. That's the presumption of innocence. But of course, in reality, all this content is able to be found, and it's having significant detrimental impact upon fathers, particularly, or men, when they may not be anything but a completely innocent victim.
Yeah.
And the family court is the worst of this. So I've seen countless fathers before the court that have just defended against false allegation after false allegation after false allegation. And the absence of a conviction is where it should finish for that family court. So they should have a look. This guy has no convictions. He's faced all these allegations. That should mean nothing, because it could mean that they've simply faced false allegation after false allegation. But instead, the court will dig up things such as cops reports. The mother's solicitor will use all of this history, even if it hasn't been found to be proven, even if the presumption of innocence still remains. All of it will be used against the father. And that should not be the case. That is another way in which the family court operates not as a proper justice system, doesn't operate to the same standards of the criminal justice system, and it acts rogue in that regard.
Look, I could talk to you all day, Michael, but I think for now we might have to wrap it up, mate. And I can't thank you enough for taking your time out of your busy schedule to articulate things in a manner in which I would never have the ability to do, and how you're told from lawyers that, oh, your case is complex. You know, this doesn't happen very often. But the reality is, this is something it's been a part of the system for a very long time, and it's at the destruction of the family unit, mate. So thank you again for your time.
Yes.